Hey, it's Nick here for Greyscalegorilla. I am the gorilla, and today we are going to do a pretty simple logo style animation. Let's head on into Cinema and start to build this thing. I think it'll be another two-parter. The first one with just the 3D here to get this, and then we'll do the second part in After Effects where we composite it and add all the fun stuff. So let's get to it. First thing we need is, I always have just enough room in this smaller screen here to make it a little difficult. But what we need is under MoGraph, text object, and I just wrote spin was my thing, all capitals. And I have this font called Bifurc. In the fonts, I'm going to go find it here. It's under B. And what that's going to do is give it this kind of fat, chunky thing, right? It's going to be kind of similar to this guy's font, kind of chunky. I don't know what one this is. If you know what font this is, I'd love to hear from you. Maybe it's even handmade logo, but I figure this is kind of similar. It's kind of big, fat, chunky text. And so that's kind of where we're going to start with. We're going to make it thicker, so in the depth here, we're going to kind of fatten it out a little bit. And we're also going to add a bevel. So if we go to caps, we go to fillet cap. And thank you to everybody that helped me figure out that this is fillet. It's a fillet, not a fillet, nothing else. So if you're ever wondering how to say it, it's fillet. And I thank everyone that wrote in, so I appreciate that. I'm going to add some steps just to round out these bevels here. I'm going to put like maybe 3 steps. Radius 5 kind of works for me. That's just enough of a bevel there. But I don't want them to touch, so I am going to go back to the object and just add a little bit of spacing. Just to somewhere around 6 or 7 looks good to me, just so they're not touching. See what I'm talking about? Okay. So that is that. Now, we need to add a floor, so come on in and add a floor. Actually, don't add a floor. Oh, I tricked you there. Come on in and add a plane. And center the plane kind of right under the middle of the words and start to scale that plane up a bit. Okay? Don't scale up the word like that. Just kind of scale the plane. And I guess the first thing we'll do is we'll texture the plane here. Too many false moves here. Let's animate first, then we'll texture. Let's do it. Let's do it the right way, Nick. Come on, don't screw this up. All right, we're gonna go to our render settings, and we're gonna go to we're gonna set our film aspect to 16:9, and that's just gonna give us this bounding box to kind of judge where our animation is, and just kind of give us an idea. So from here, let's just animate and get that kind of broken up shatter effect. And what we need for that is under MoGraph, we need a fracture object. There it is. So we place the text under the fracture object, right? And then we need a random effector. So with the fracture object selected, remember, that's the best way to do this. You go to random effector, and now we have a random effector. We don't want to affect position. What we want to affect is rotation. And if we turn on rotation, we slide this out here, you're going to see it is not acting how we want it to. So we need to go in the fracture object and say, no, we want you to explode segments, and let's just keep rotating this until we find out that it works. So I'm just going to set this to rotate like this. And you're going to see still it's not working the way we want. None of these features work. And like a lot of problems I encounter in cinema, when I have this thing, it's just not working the way I expect it to, I go ahead and I throw a null in between it, and then I put the object, and now I'm getting what I want. And somehow this just works. I'm going to be around some of the Maxon developers and stuff in a few weeks at NAB, and I'm going to ask them, what is this whole hierarchy? How is this read, and why does this null object always seem to be a magic trick? So hopefully I'll get some more concrete reason why this works. But for now, if you ever have this weird issue with, just stuff not working, throw a null object in between it and see if that works. In this case, it does. Explode segments is what we want. Explode segments and connect, by the way, will keep the letters on their kind of own. And then you can come in here and rotate just the letters. But what we want to do is we want to go explode segments, and we have everything separate now. And now we get this kind of funky, all the chunks are splitting apart. So we have the fronts coming apart, we have the bevels coming apart, and we have the actual kind of surroundings coming apart. If we go to 0, it all comes back together. And this is essentially what we're going to animate. We're going to animate going up and then coming back, right? So let's go ahead and start the animation. So we're at frame 0. So the first thing, we need to add a few frames. I'm going to go to 120 frames just to give us a little bit more kind of time. 90 frames is 3 seconds. This just bumps it up to 4 seconds just to give us a little bit more room. So now, at frame 0, this is where we want it to start. We don't want anything else. So we set a keyframe for the heading, which is what we're moving, right? Keep that at 0. And then we set a keyframe for the the rotation of the heading by holding down Control and hitting that red dot right there. Keyframe is set. So now we go to maybe around 60 frames. Try out different places. We could always change these later as well. And we're just going to crank up the rotation on that heading to get some of this funky movement. Just play around. Somewhere around 400 looks good for me. Feel free to experiment. And then it's going to suck back together down the road here, maybe around 80 some frames, back to 0. I'm going to hit 0, and then I'm going to set that keyframe one more time. So now if we watch it, it goes sweetness. Now, on mine, I added an extra little bit of animation. What I ended up animating was also the pitch of this junk here. And this just, I don't know, it just added something else, something fun. This straight up rotation was kind of bugging me, so I added a little bit more extra, and I liked it. So if you want to add that, what I did was I started it later. So it started to rotate this way, and then somewhere around here, I set a keyframe for the pitch. So highlight the pitch, hit Control R on the dot, and then I just offset the animation. So somewhere, either before or after this, this middle ground, I kind of set the animation here. And I'm offsetting things just to keep it a little bit more, random looking, I guess. So this looked cool to me. This was kind of where it ended up. I set another rotation keyframe, and then I straightened it out before it got back. So then I set 0, and I set a keyframe again. And this is what we end up with. We end up with kind of some funky stuff going on. I don't like how long it's taking to get to that first move, so I could actually just pick up this keyframe and just move it back. And that's just going to get it into that position kind of quicker. I also don't like how fast it's whipping back. So I could actually, right here in this timeline, or down here, we could do it too. We could just kind of move this stuff forward a little bit. And now that looks a little smoother. It's not whipping back as quickly. Okay. I'm happy with the animation right now. We may come back to it. For now, I think that's our general move. Let's animate. Let's add some textures, and then we'll add the camera. So, and there's no right way. There's no you have to animate, and then you do textures, and then you do this. If you're feeling something, man, just get into it, right? So right now, I'm feeling like we need to make this thing sexy. So the first thing we're gonna do is add a texture to the front that is different from the texture to the top. If you look at our example, if I pull it up here, that is not it. Let me see if we have that movie still open. It looks like I closed it like a jerk. Is there a open recent simple spin 2? Okay, so if we look at the texture, there's kind of a different texture for the front than there is for the edges. And the way you do that, what's really cool is if it's on text, there's a pre-made way to do that. So let's go ahead and make the black front texture first. New material. You're going to double-click to open it up. The color is kind of a dark gray-ish black. Really, really, really close to black. I rarely like to make things perfectly black. There's always a little bit of kind of something in there. So somewhere around here, you know, and you can also offset the color just to make it a little off black. We're going to add some reflection. We're just going to turn it way, way down. So in this case, you know, maybe 5%. We're also going to add the Fresnel shader, and then we're going to turn that way down as well, maybe 20, 30, something like that. And that just gives us just a little bit of gloss, you know. And that's really it for the front. Now, here's what's cool. If we add it to our text object, you can see the whole thing is now our reflective-y black. And that's not what we want. We want it just on the front. So you can see right here on the texture, if you click on the actual texture itself on the object, you're going to get this selection tab. Now, what you can do is you can, you know, learn how to select polygons and make and set selections, but there's some pre-made selections in some objects. And in this text object, and I think it also works with the sweep NURBS and the extrude NURBS and stuff like this, it also works. But what it is it's called C1 and C2. So if we put C2 in, you're going to see if we flip around to the back of the object, that C2 is the back cap, cap 2. And if we go to cap 1, that's our front cap. Pretty cool, right? So that's how we set it up. So we're actually going to set one texture for C1, and then I'm going to duplicate kind of that texture by holding Control and dragging out and having a second one. This one is C2, right? And that's going to get our back to this black texture. And then any texture we throw on under this is going to be our edges by default. So let's just build that really quickly. New material. We're going to say color, texture, and in this case, we're going to use a Fresnel shader again. But we're going to use it to kind of color our sides, kind of some fun colors. So we're going to go from like maybe a blue. At least I'm going to go from a blue to like a pink. That's kind of what I ended up with. And you can pick different colors. Feel free to play around. Now, if I put it on top of our other textures, just like that, everything turns to the new texture. But if I put it under the other two textures, it's going to texture with the pink, blue, and then it's going to add the black caps on top of it. So now you'll see what we get are the blue, pink edges, and then our black caps. And this is what we want. What else are we going to do here? So we're going to add some reflection to our pinky blue edge, or whatever color yours is. Same thing, I'm going to add a Fresnel shader. And again, our Fresnel shader kind of gives you more realistic reflections. So there we go. Now, I don't want that strong of a reflection, so I'm going to turn down the main brightness. I'm also going to turn down our main reflection. And we're also going to add a little trick here. We're going to use this same shader on the luminance channel to kind of light this object from the inside, right? So we can go to texture, we can go to copy channel, go to luminance, turn it on, and say paste channel. Now we don't want it super bright, so I'm going to turn it down. I'm going to turn down the brightness of the top here, but I'm also going to turn down the brightness of the Fresnel just to not have it blown out super bright. Maybe not that much, but just so it's not crazy. Now, with lighting, we're going to keep the lighting really minimal on this. It's a really simple animation, and there's kind of two techniques we're going to use for lighting. One is going to be in your render settings, you got to go to ambient occlusion, and just to speed up the rendering, I'm going to take this to 50%. And then I'm going to come back out. I'm going to hit render, and you're going to see with ambient occlusion, what it's starting to do is give you a little bit of shading around the edges. And if you don't know what ambient occlusion does, it looks at how close other objects are to a polygon or an edge and decides to shade it. So you can see there's shading here because there's other shapes next to it. There's no shading here because there's not any other shapes next to it. So it's kind of a fake way to light your scene with this kind of soft light. And if you come back in and we turn up the contrast to something like 35 or so, and we add our maximum ray length, we add maybe 50 to it or something, 150 or so, what the maximum ray length does is it calculates further for that shadow. So it looks farther from the point to find the shadows. And it also, with our contrast, is going to darken up that shadow. So now I'm going to hit render again. You're going to see we have this kind of heavier shadow at the bottom, and everything's looking good. Now, a couple things we're going to fix. Our spin logo is actually going underground. If we flip under, you see our bevel is actually kicking it underground. So I'm going to grab our text object, get our move tool, and just move it up until it's above ground. In fact, it may actually look kind of cool if it's floating a little bit above. Hit render. Now we are freaking talking. Now let's talk about this background, or this floor here. Now, it's kind of a cool little cheat for a floor. If you go to New Material and you go to Color, we're going to go to Gradient, and we're going to set that in our gradient. We're going to go to Circular Gradient. We're going to set the center for kind of a bright color, and then we're going to set the kind of back here to black. And you want to make sure the black is moved up. You don't want it here because it's not going to clear in time, because this is kind of square, just like the background, just like the floor or the plane. In fact, I think we can actually set a plane. If you command click in here, you can go to plane, and now you can see what it looks like. It's pretty much the same as that, but it just gives you a better idea. You want to move this knot up until it's faded off to black, and you'll see why in a second. We're also going to add a new knot right here that's kind of almost black, okay? And we're just going to move that thing way up. And let's hit render and see what happens. Nothing happens. It's because I didn't add the texture to the plane yet. So grab the texture, throw it on the plane, and hit render, and let's see what we got. So what we're trying to kind of emulate, I'm going to move this knot away. And what we're emulating here is kind of a spotlight effect. And between this floor spotlight effect and the ambient occlusion, we're starting to get some kind of fake lighting, right? Just right there for your scene. Really kind of simple stuff. Okay? So that's that. Now, it's looking okay. Let's look at it kind of in the middle of what it's doing here. You hit render, and it's looking pretty cool to me. Now, you can see it's a little grainy in the shadows, and that's because our accuracy on the ambient occlusion is low. So we got to make sure to turn that back up before we hit render. But everything else is looking good. Now, the last thing we're going to add as far as texturing and stuff is a little bit of reflection. Now, if we go back again and look at this, what we're missing is this kind of shiny reflection stuff. And you can see it kind of glossed out here, and it kind of reflects right there. So this is how we're going to add it. There's two ways to do it. If you have my lighting kit, you add an overhead softbox, and you're pretty much done. You can scale it to fit the scene, but then other than that, and maybe picking a slightly different color, you would be all set rendering. If you don't have it, let me show you an alternative that's a little bit more complicated, but pulls it off pretty similar, pretty close. So we're going to add a plane. We're going to come in. We're going to add a new material. And in the luminance channel, we're just going to crank it to white. And we're going to add it to the plane. And this is kind of giving us this softbox effect. It's not as accurate looking, but it's going to work the same way for kind of reflection-y stuff. And if we just add it up in the air, and we zoom back in, and we hit render, it's not quite coming through there. Kind of have to look up at it. There we go. Now we're starting to get it. One thing we could do is actually aim this thing back. So kind of move it back, and of course make it larger, just so we could hit more reflections. So by aiming it back, we're kind of cheating it on the top there. We're trying to get reflections on the top edge. Now you're starting to see it. We could even come into the brightness and crank it up and really try to get some shiny, reflection-y stuff right there. That's looking pretty cool. And you can also see, if we kind of go in the middle here and hit render, you're going to start to see it also in the sky right there. You can see that little reflection right there. That's going to help us kind of give us this little blingy blingy effects on the top. I'm actually even going to make this a little brighter just to overdo it a bit. Just because I like kind of that little shine right there. So maybe a little larger and maybe a little bit off, and now we are rocking. We're ready to go. Now, before we do our camera animation, let me show you a couple things. One is we're going to go back into our floor texture. We're going to add reflection, and we're just going to make it, like 5-6% reflective. Just a bit, and see how it just kind of pops in right there. The other thing is we don't want, let me render again from here. We don't want this reflection thing to show in your reflection. We don't want this. Okay, so we want the this white card on the top to reflect in the letters, but not in the floor. We don't want to see it down here. And the way to do that is to right-click or command-click on the plane, on the bright plane, on the top one. Add a compositing tag. It's under Cinema 4D Tags, Compositing. And then see, by default, we have this exclusion tab right here. It says Mode Exclude. All you have to do is drag the bottom plane, the floor plane, into it. And when we hit render, that floor plane is going to ignore the top. This works with the light kit as well. So just highlight that light and add the compositing tag, drag whatever you don't want it to see in there, and it basically, the plane is now ignoring the floor plane. If we kind of rename this, the floor plane is now ignoring our light plane. So that's how it is. Getting close. Now you can see we have some jagged edges on our lights. Just like anytime we use reflections, we need to come in and turn on our anti-aliasing to best and set it to 2x2. So 1x1 by 2x2. That's going to give us a lot sharper edges. It's going to give us a little bit longer render time, but you can see that line now is a little sharper. It's still not perfect, and if it's really not perfect, it's really giving you more jaggies, you could up that to 4x4, and you're going to start to get even cleaner edges. Again, at the expense of render time. So let's add our camera and get this thing rendered out for some After Effects. I'm going to use, if we go to the content browser, you should have your CS tools installed. If you're not familiar with the CS tools, it's a bunch of really cool, useful tools from Chris Smith, and he makes awesome stuff, and it's free. So go to his site, check it out, install it, and watch some of my tutorials on how to use these things. I'm going to use EasyCam, and double-clicking is not the way to do it. What you want to do is drag it in. So I'm going to drag in the EasyCam. And quickly, if you want to know how the EasyCam works, really specifically, go watch my tutorial on it. Try to link it up, remember. But you can follow along here pretty easily. I'm going to select the start cam. I'm going to make sure lock E to S is on. I'm going to pick my starting position. My starting position is kind of something like this. Kind of close up and kind of straight on. And then I'm going to go to my EasyCam end position, E. I'm going to shut off my lock E to S. And then this second camera is going to be my end point. And my end point is kind of up above looking down at the text. So just position your start and end points. And they could be anywhere. They don't have to match mine. I'm just going to do a quick test render. That looks pretty good to me. So that's that. It's a little off center. We can adjust it. Now, all we have to do is look through the EasyCam cam, and when we hit play, it's going to kind of go between those 2 points. The only other thing we're going to change is the duration. I'm going to make it 4 seconds instead of 3, and that's just going to slow it down. And you can see we have one other problem. It's kind of going in a straight line. We're going to use its camera path bend here to kind of make it arc around. So let me explain what that is. If we're looking at the top, let me just make that full frame here. If we're looking at the top, what we want our camera to do is instead of going a straight line between these two positions, we want it to kind of arc around like this. And that's what this camera path bend does. If I add strength and add angle you can see this thing is kind of rotating around, and that's rotating around kind of like a jump rope, okay? See like that? It's like kind of like a jump rope. What we want it to do is go this way, and obviously not so much. So I'm just going to turn down the strength. And to see what it's doing, we have to go back into here. And we're getting there. So I want to change our start position. I want it to be away a little bit. So I'm just going to grab the start camera, move it back, go back to our other camera. And one other thing, we're going to change the focal length to something a little bit wider. 22 millimeters sounds kind of right to me. And that's looking it. That's essentially the render. Now, some things we need to do to prep the render. So let's just check it at the beginning. This is our first frame. That is looking good. And then I may open up this floor a little bit. It's kind of too close of a spotlight. So maybe we just go back into our color gradient and open that up just a little bit more, just to give it a little bit more room to kind of breathe. That feels good. Okay, let's render this puppy. So we have to go back to our render settings, go to ambient occlusion, and turn up our accuracy. Maybe 70% will do. I usually find 70 or 80% with ambient occlusion is usually good enough. Your results may vary. Output. All right, let's set our output. We already got 16 by 9. Let's make it a little bit larger, something like, I don't know, 800 by, I got to keep it 16 by 9, so lock ratio. So 16 by 9 is 800 by 450, and so that should be plenty. If you want it to be high def, you could go 1280 by whatever, just set it to 16 by 9, and it'll do the math for you. Down here it says current frame. We actually want all frames, all 120 frames to be rendered. And we want to choose where it's saved, so I need to kind of wiggle around the windows here and come in here and say tutorials, simple text spin, and I'm going to say new render 3. This is just where I'm keeping the renders for this kind of project here. So create, and I'm going to say text spin 3. Everything else is looking good. We don't need an alpha channel. We don't need a compositing file because we're just rendering out a TIFF sequence. There's nothing really we're going to match move or anything like that. So we don't necessarily need the full project file with all the mats and everything. So we're just going to render out a TIFF sequence, which is default. I'm just going to go back through the settings. When you're rendering 3D, I have a habit of double checking everything because it does take a long time to render, so you do want to kind of come in and make sure everything's looking the right way. So everything looks good to me. Now I'm going to save. I'm going to save the project. Same thing, simple text spin. I'm going to say simple spin project 3D. I'm going to say 3D. Good. And then we're ready. So I'm going to hit Shift R. And that's going to start our render. And you can see it's not taking too long to render, but our glow looks good. Our shadows don't have too much grain in them. I could see the reflection going on up in there. I like it. I do like it. So it looks like this will take a little bit to render. And so let's end it there. So we'll do another 2-parter. We will be back in the next part where we'll take it into After Effects and we'll add some compositing and color correct it. And we're also going to add those cool little stripy side things. It's just a kind of a technique I was playing around with. I thought it looked pretty cool, so I added it to the scene. And I want to show you how to build those stripes. So I will see you in part 2, where we're going to rock some After Effects on this scene. Hey everyone, it's Nick again for Greyscalegorilla. I am the gorilla, and today we're going to do part 2 of the text animation we started with. And in this part 2, we're going to bring that animation into After Effects to do some compositing and to also add some extra elements and to kind of finish it off. So let's head into After Effects. Let's rock this puppy here. So we're in After Effects, and the first thing we need to do is bring in our render. I'm going to double-click over here, and I'm going to find our folder, and I'm going to bring in the TIFF sequence. You want to make sure the TIFF sequence checkbox is on over here. And click open. That's it. Now, the best way to start a project is to just drag it into this new project box right here. Bam. And you can see we have this project. Let's adjust the windows just so we have some room here. I think we may have just enough room to play with this thing. Full frame, full screen. It may be a little tough, but let's see how we could do it. So here's our render. Let's just preview it and see what we got. Just bare bones done, ready to go. Not bad. Looks pretty cool. Now, we're going to add up some gloss, some shine. We're going to add some color correction, and also these stripe things that we talked about. Remember, in my animation that I made kind of for this tutorial to show you what we're building, I found these like cool little stripe things on the side, and I thought they were kind of cool. I'm going to also show you how to build these things. So I'm going to gloss it up, get all these fun glows and everything going, and add the stripes. So let's just get to it. Now, a lot of this stuff may be familiar, so I may go actually a little fast on this one, because a lot of these steps are in other tutorials of mine where we do the basic compositing. So I'm going to try not to, do a step-by-step, word-by-word thing. So I'm assuming you've seen some of the older stuff. If I'm going a little fast for you, go back and watch some of the other tutorials where I go through After Effects, and you'll see that I'll go through a little bit more slowly in some of the old ones. So let's just get to it. The first thing I'm going to do is add a new adjustment layer and add curves. I typed in curves. I'm going to add curves over here. Just give it a general boost. I like to just start with a general kind of contrast boost, maybe up the gamma a little bit. I'm going to duplicate our bottom layer here, and I'm going to add a directional blur to our upper layer, and that's going to be right here, directional blur. I'm going to go like a kind of a 45-degree thing and then blur it. You can see we have this kind of thing going on. And what I'm going to use is screen mode to just kind of start to add some of this blurry, mushy stuff. Now, this is too much. I'm going to hit T for transparency on this top layer and just kind of turn it down, maybe somewhere around 50% or so. That kind of brightens everything up just a little bit too much. So we're just going to adjust our curve again to kind of give it back some contrast and gloss out this top here. From here, we're going to add the vignette. We're going to go new adjustment layer, and we're going to go levels, and we're going to add a new levels to the adjustment layer, and then we're just going to kind of darken everything just like that, and that just kind of crunches our levels. But then we're going to use the ellipse tool and kind of just draw an ellipse and invert the ellipse, and then hit F for feather, and we're going to feather it. And that's going to give us just kind of this general vignette, just kind of darken the corners a little bit. Let's see how this looks up here. Now, it's a little darker here. So you can see here everything's a little brighter because we have this bright glossy stuff and we have the floor kicking in. At this angle, things are kind of dark. And I think what we may end up doing is, we'll do this at the end too, is even animate our levels and animate our color correction so that here it's a little brighter, and here we darken things down just to keep it kind of looking even. You don't always have to have the same color correction over everything either. So that's looking good. What other fun things can we add? Let's add in our curves. I always love to try screwing with some of these colors. So let's come into the blue and maybe green and try to kick up some weird colors here. I'm going to come into red and maybe even clip some of these red colors a little bit. And what that's going to do is, if you just kind of A-B things, it just kind of screws with the colors just a little bit. Green I'm not digging. I'm actually going to take some green away. And we're starting to look pretty fun. maybe we could add a little bit more of this glossy stuff. We play around here. Okay, let's add a glow. We're going to add a new adjustment layer. And over here, we're going to say glow. And it's under stylized glow. And then I'm going to up the threshold so just the really hot spots are going to be kind of glow. You could turn it on and off and see that a lot of it's glowing. We don't want that much of it. So we're just going to turn it up till just the hot spots. Still a little much. May have to go way up. It's getting better. So we're going to set the radius to something larger, like, I don't know, 30, let's say. We're just going to get this kind of soft glow around everything. Let's check it at the beginning. That's looking pretty good. See, it's only popping on the highlights. Now we're talking. Glow intensity, maybe we can up it a little bit just for now. We can always kick it back. Try to go overboard usually, and then bring it back for subtlety out down the road. That's kind of an opposite way to go. Just a quick thing about kind of overdoing it. I've learned, I guess, by doing this long enough where you tend to overdo stuff. And I still end up overdoing stuff. Sometimes I'll go back and look at a render I just finished, half an hour ago, and I'll go, that's so contrasted, so bright or so saturated or something. So do be careful that you don't overdo it. But don't be afraid to crank the numbers and see what happens. You could always pull back. Maybe it's a life philosophy, really. Go for it. This glow is a little overdone, though. So let's pull it back. I'm going to go 95, maybe 92. It's still a little hot. What I think I may do is just bring it under the color correction. No, I liked it above. Let's bring it back. I think all I'm going to do is turn it down. So instead of that 2 intensity, I'm going to go back to 1, just because it was a little much after that big whole long speech about it. Now, this is, again, something I just, do when things are looking cool, but they're a little black. Like you see the black background, the black text is getting a little bit there. Sometimes I'll add another adjustment layer, add some levels, and just pick up the blacks a little bit. See how it just kind of fades things in? That's a lot. But just enough to kind of add the detail kind of almost back in a way. So this is pretty cool. I want to add one more set of kind of mushy stuff. Remember we have this streaky thing that's kind of adding some screen. Maybe I'll turn that up. And what you could do even is add a levels to this. And really, instead of having all this color, maybe even just crank it and crush the levels here so it's really blown out. And that way, it's kind of more dramatic, right? And I may even move it. See how it's kind of bleeding off the edge a little bit? Yeah, see these things are starting to happen with these edges. Maybe a little bright. I'll pull it back. And especially back here, you're going to see how bright it is. I kind of like it. One more thing we're going to do, something kind of weird. We're going to take a copy of our main render, and I'm going to bring it kind of up on top of everything. And then we're going to find some fun kind of mode to kind of screen through it. Now, I'm also going to scale it by a little bit. So I'm going to go to like 105%. And you can see what we have is kind of this scaled up version of, let me turn off our blending mode. We have this slightly scaled up version of our render. And we're just going to find a fun blending mode to kind of add on or multiply or something on top of this, just to give it like some offset look. This, in fact, maybe even a little too much. So 102 maybe scale. And we're just going to kind of get this offset look. And we could find, scroll through and see what you find. If you find something too that you like, but it's too much, just turn it down. Like turn down the amount to like a lower number. So this is kind of cool. Again, you can play with the offset. And you're just starting to get just a little bit of weirdness to it. That's getting a little much. We may have to tone some things down. This is also darkening it a little bit too much. So let's try overlay, may be one of them. If we turn that up. Screen may be cool. Screen may work at a really low number, like 10% or something like that. So this may be just enough. Yeah, this is pretty cool. Again, we're just getting this slight offset. It's basically just adding a little bit of randomness to the look. You could see if I offset it over here, you're starting to see the edge. It's almost like a screwed up TV, or like the guns are misaligned, or something like that. You could also color it too if you don't want it the same color. We could come into like tints, and we could color this thing instead of black to white. We can go like black to green, and now it's going to have this kind of green halo around it, just really slight, but it's there. Okay, let's tone down this blur a bit. It's getting a little funky. I think we're just going to turn the opacity down because I like the kind of quality of it. It's just a little too much, so maybe 35, something like that. That is looking pretty good. I'm doing a RAM preview. I'm doing a shift RAM preview, and what that does is it skips every other frame, and that gives me a really quick idea of how things are looking. Sexy, sexy, sexy. Let's add one more adjustment layer, and we're going to add some noise on this one. Essentially, we're adding like grain, right? So I'm going to add noise. No, I think I want grain. Let's see what grain gives us. Noise and grain. Let's open this up. We're going to say add grain. By default, you have this kind of huge grain. And you also have this box. What you have to do is come up here to viewing mode and say final output. And that's going to do the full set of grain. And you're also going to have to squish the size down. I'm going to go like 0.1. Really teeny kind of film grain look, but it's way too much. You see how dirty and noisy that is? We're going to set the intensity to like 0.2. That's looking more like it. Now, between the glow and the grain, we're starting to get kind of this film look thing going on. It's essentially kind of a cheap film look with built-in plugins. There are some cool plugins like faux film. There's also these BCC plugins that do a good job, but I don't want you to have to buy stuff to go through these tutorials. So that's kind of the default grain look. Some glow and some grain, and now we're talking. So from here, let's start to add those stripes. Now, I'm going to squish my window back out just so we could see our whole window, so we could start to play with it. And essentially what I did was just to clean things up. So I like the way things look. It looks good here, and it looks good at the end. In fact, let's just set that one quick keyframe. Remember we talked about keyframing the brightness overall to kind of adjust this dark to bright thing going on. So let's just animate our top levels here. So I'm really just going to play with the gamma. See what right here? I just kind of want it to go from here and then kind of darken as we get toward the end, and then we go to here. So let's set a keyframe for here, somewhere toward the end. On our levels, we could just set a keyframe for the histogram right there. And then we come back to the beginning where things are kind of dark. We could play with this gamma here and just give it a little bit more brightness and detail. And all of a sudden, we have animated levels that kind of keep our brightness consistent through the whole thing. Now, if I hit render, you're going to see it go. Things are looking fantastic. Now, grain, I like the quality of the grain, but we're going to turn it off just for a moment for the tutorial because grain does take a while to render. So there we go. We're looking pretty good. I think it's time to add those stripes we talked about. So here's the way I did it. I went back to our project window, which is right here, and I took our whole composition. This is essentially kind of like making a pre-comp, but I dragged the whole new composition into into the Make New Project kind of Make a New Composition button here, and it brought in our whole thing ready to go. This is our whole, glow and everything ready to rock. And what I did was I made a duplicate copy of it, and then I used this duplicate copy to kind of start to make these stripes. So what I did was I rotated this animation, I scaled it down, maybe left it kind of large, and brought it over to the side. And what I like to do is use animation that I've already built and already made to drive something else, to kind of make my own animation out of it. And the way I built these stripes is I kind of animated it, moved it over, or duplicated it, moved it over, and then I added a directional blur to it. So I'm going to type in directional blur. If we go out, you see directional blur, and that's not what we want. We just want to double click on it. There we go. And we're just going to blur it. And because it's aimed up, it's actually aiming in the right direction because this plugin is looking at this footage like it's right side up. So we're actually blurring it in the correct way. And you're seeing where, if I pull it out, we're just kind of making these cool little stripes, right? So that's the first part. The next thing we need to do is add a levels, and we're just going to crunch this until we get kind of pure black and pure color. Just got to move this out. And we're starting to get these cool little chunks. And if I crank the black even more, we're going to get even more of these kind of chunks here, especially if I keep the stripes going. And that's essentially what these little lines are made of. So if I hit render, we actually get something pretty cool that's not the stripes. This may be cool just to play around with. If you screen it on top of your existing footage, you're basically using the animation to kind of add this like little weird lens flare kind of weirdness going on, which I like. It's not what I had built, but we could use this actually. I may even just tone this down, maybe 20%, and kind of have this hanging out and maybe like stretch it out. See how I'm stretching it out? I'm just going to let that kind of float on top of everything. It's kind of giving it, kind of like that other tutorial we did with the blurs. It's just kind of giving it a little bit more room. I may turn it way down. That looks pretty cool. So, you know, it's just, I don't want to take a detour, but that's kind of a cool experiment that we ran into, found something. So let's get back to what we were talking about. Let's make those stripes, right? So I got to bring it over to the edge. And let's find a place where it's a little more busy. And then what I did was I went to a layer new solid. And I made a solid that was the same height, but it was only like 10 pixels wide, right? And here's the solid. And I brought it over to the edge. And we're basically going to use this solid as an alpha matte for our stripes. So let's shut off the background for now and just concentrate on what's going on. We have the stripes, this text spin 3 here. That was a duplicate with the blur and the levels crunched. We're going to use this white layer as an alpha matte to cut out the stripes. So if we come into what's below here, we have our track matte, and we could set that to alpha matte, and by default, it's going to look right above where it is to the white solid one, which we just made, to make an alpha matte. And just like that, we have these stripes now that are kind of like blinking up and down the screen, and they look pretty dang cool to me, I think. So let's see what those look like. It's rendering right now. Here it comes. Kind of subtle, but that animation is built off of an animation we've already made, right? And we could adjust it, so we can actually move it and see where it looks better, right? We could even crunch our levels even higher and get these little blinky things. Kind of looks like Human Genome Project or some crap like that. You know what I mean? The last thing we need to do is take this white solid. I think it's still a little too thick. I'm gonna hit S for scale, and I'm gonna unlink the constrained proportions. I don't want it to scale proportionally. I just want to scale it in this direction. So I'm just gonna which is the X direction here. So I'm just gonna thin it out to make these bars even thinner, and then shut it off. And you're gonna see we have this really, really thin bar hanging out, doing its thing. Now, to make more of them, we just highlight both of our layers. Remember, we have 2 of these to make this one effect. One as the alpha matte, and one as the actual kind of animation. We're going to duplicate it, and then we're going to take that white layer, and we're going to offset it. I'm just hitting the arrow keys on my keyboard to offset it. So now we have a second one, And all we have to do is grab our underlying animation, which is still there, and we can move it. So this text spin 3 here is actually still hanging out. We could scale it, in another way. We can kind of pull it over and like scale it up. And then what's really cool is we could add a hue saturation right here. Let's get to a point where it's a little brighter. There we go. See how they're both pink? We can actually skew them both different colors. So if we just grab the hue saturation now on the second one, you're going to see now we have more yellowish colors. And because I offset the actual animation, we're not getting the identical same little bars. And that's exactly what we want. We do this one more time. I'm going to highlight both of them, duplicate, and then I'm going to take the white solid, offset it. I'm just using my arrow keys. Good. Take the bottom part and offset it. This time I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to hit W for rotate, wotate, and I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, just like that, and I'm just going to flip it. So now all 3 of these are going to flip in a different way. I'm also going to use this hue saturation one more time to get a new color. This green maybe blue. And I'm going to hit render and see what this looks like. And you can see we kind of have these cool little digital stripe things going on. That is all based on our existing animation. And I love that kind of stuff. The last thing we need to do is screen all of these onto the background. So I'm going to head down, turn on our background, and you're going to see that there's... I already have it screened, so I must have done that earlier. But you can see that instead of... If I don't have it screened, I'm going to turn it to normal. You're going to see that there's a black bar there. Let me zoom in so you can see it. This black bar is there because it's just the existing footage. What I want to do is blend it into the background, so that's why I used the screen command to kind of screen it on so the blacks disappear and we see through to the background. So let's zoom out and watch this kind of all together. Let's see if we can make some room here. We could even hit the tilde key, which is right next to the 1 key. If you hit the tilde key, it's going to make whatever window you're in full frame. So if it's your timeline, it does that. If it's this window, the main composition window, it does that. And that's what we're going to do. I'm going to do a shift RAM preview, and we're going to check out our handiwork. I think it's pretty cool. Now, the last thing we could do is, in my original animation, I had 2 copies. I had one here, and then I had another one here. And all I did there was collect all of our layers except for our bottom main layer. So everything above that we just built these stripes with, I pre-comped them by hitting Shift-Command-C. I said stripes, called it stripes, and then I had to redo the screen on it. And then I duplicated it and rotated the whole thing around 180 degrees, and now we have kind of matching stripes on either side. So now when I do render, we got both sides, which is pretty dang cool. I like it. I am happy. I hope you're happy too. I think that is it. Now, of course, we could play around kind of forever. There could be more glows, more stripes, and in fact, I would encourage you to do the same. I have been seeing a lot of people kind of follow the directions of the tutorial and then kind of render out. Actually, let's go to camera for this one. Let's get serious for a moment. First of all, thank you for watching the tutorial. I hope you learned something. I hope you got a lot out of it, and I hope you made some cool looking shit. Now, if your shit looks like my shit, I would encourage you to see how much further you can push it, or see how much more you can do to it, or see how much you can integrate this with your idea or whatever's going on. What I've been seeing is, and it's not just my site, it's kind of everybody's, is people getting to the point where they did the tutorial and then they upload it and they want to show it off. And at a certain point, following the directions of a tutorial is kind of one thing, right? And I think this is important. That's the reason I'm doing this, is so you guys can learn. But I think when I learned the most, it's when I found out how to do a tutorial, how to do a specific thing, and then I tried to push it further, right? So how would you do this with like 2 different words in 3D? Or how would you combine this with mode dynamics? Or how would you combine this with cloth? Or how would you combine this with a different color or even a different font or a look, right? So think about how to make it a little bit more your own, because it's not just about if you copy me or not. I really don't care. I'm looking out for you, right? So if you put something like this directly on your reel or on your site or whatever, I think most people would know where you got it. You know what I'm saying? They may know me and they may know that it's a tutorial. But if you can push it into your own way, if you could go back and redo this and make it your own and use the techniques you found to make your own project or push it a little bit more, or instead of using the random effector, why not try a different effector and see what that does? Things like that will give you a piece that then you can put on your reel that's all yours and not mine. So anyway, maybe that was a little much for the end of this tutorial, but just a little bit of encouragement to go out there, take what you just found, build something new out of it, and just kick some ass, man. I want to see your renders. I want to see what you do with it. And again, I really appreciate you guys watching. Really appreciate you guys watching my tutorials. Now get out there, make some more cool shit, and I'll see you back here in another tutorial really dang soon. I'm getting pumped. Sorry it's been so long. Here it comes. I feel the rambling. The rambling is going to come. Here it is. It's been too long. I'm sorry. I got to get you guys more tutorials. So come on back. I will see you back here with some more tutorials. And thanks for watching, everybody. See ya.